Matchmaker.fm connects podcasters and guests. Welcome to Matched, the show where we talk to some of the most incredible guests available for an interview right now. I'm your host, James Mulvany, founder of Matchmaker.fm, and this is Matched.
Hi, I'm Violette Ayala, and you can find me on Matchmaker.fm.
Hey, Violet, how's it going? Welcome to Matched.
Good, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm really good. So, to start off with, we always start with a couple of icebreakers. So my first question for you today is, what is the worst job you've ever had?
Oh my gosh. The worst job I ever had was when I was in college. I worked for a children's boutique, and I had to clean up like right before we closed. We'd close like around 1 or 2 in the morning. You know, it was here in Miami. It's still actually up and running, and having to sweep the floors, vacuum, mop, clean the bathrooms. I was a disaster at that the first couple of weeks. I just couldn't, I was like, no one had ever taught me how to do that. I just would throw like a whole gallon of like Lysol, and the owner of the boutique was like, this isn't like, you can't clean like this. So I was just completely ignorant, with that. I think it was like the worst job because I could never get it right. It was like, I could just never get it right. So, and
coupled with the time of the day you had to do it as well, like 1-2 o'clock in the morning. That's harsh,
And working the entire day in retail, like you're on your feet, you're addressing, it was a high trendy kind of luxury brand children's boutique. So, I feel like the people were a little bit more high maintenance, and kids were always running around crazy, like ruining displays, like the shoes and then the clothes. And it was like an utter nightmare all the time. And then to close out the night, it was like okay, now it's time to clean it up, clean up all the kids, what they had done. So that was I think a challenging first time job, actually.
There we go. And what would you say is one of the best books you've ever read?
Oh my gosh, my favorite book. I love Gary Zukav's Seed of the Soul. I think that was like life transformation right there in a little book for me. Marianne Williamson's, Woman's Worth, Return to Love. Those were 3 that come to mind.
I love how you can answer that straight away, because a lot of people, when you say that, they're like, I can't just narrow it down to one book, or they kind of just think, I don't know, I've read so many. But that's great. Okay, Violet. So just please start off by telling us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I am the founder of FemCity, and we have about 88 locations in the US and Canada, and we help women connect, network, and grow their brands through online programming, local curriculum, mentorship, coaching. And it's very exciting. We're continuously growing, which is great. Last year, we didn't grow too much, obviously, but we're looking at expanding into other countries. And it's a very rewarding role that I play in the lives of thousands of women, where I'm able to help them to really go after their dreams and attain it.
I'm curious to know, it sounds like a fantastic initiative. What made you start that? What kind of inspired you to kind of launch that in the first place?
Sure. So my first business, I was 22 years old, was in 1995. Dating myself there. It's okay. I don't care. And I started a personal training business, and I had no idea how to do that. I had never taken a business class. It was before Google, it was before LinkedIn. So there weren't that many business books on like how to start a new business. And I made every mistake possible. And I always told myself that when I had the ability, I would always pay it forward and help others to create businesses and grow wealth. And so I kept on launching more and more businesses. I ended up launching a Pilates studio. We had multiple locations. And of course, now FemCity, I also ran a boutique PR marketing agency, really specializing in environmental initiatives in Miami. And along the way, I just kept learning more about business and just made that promise to myself that I would help women navigate, starting a business and growing and scaling businesses as well. I'm super passionate about scaling business. And so when I had the opportunity to do it, I just felt the calling to do it. And I started, there's no monetization, there's no business model, there was nothing but just heart and soul. And I thought, I'm just going to put it out there. And then little by little, we started launching more and more chapters across the US on the East Coast. And then it kind of started migrating over towards the Midwest, and then to the West, and then to other countries. And here we are.
Amazing. I love that. That's great. And what a great story as well. So I'm curious to know, what sort of led you to sign up to Matchmaker.fm?
So I think I discovered it on LinkedIn. And I know that podcasts are a great way to to reach out to new people, to learn about your mission and your service and how you serve and show up in the world. And Matchmaker had a great, Matchmaker.fm had a great directory. It was really easy to use. And there were already a lot of big people on it. So I just hopped on there and registered. And listen, every time you can get on a podcast, it's great for you to get to know other people and also for other people to get to know you.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And had you been on many podcasts prior to this?
You know what? I had someone who used to work for us who would do podcasts. She was like a podcast publicist, I guess, is the terminology. I'm not really sure. So she would reach out and spend hours looking for podcast opportunities for me. She no longer does that. But obviously, I have Matchmaker.fm to lead directory opportunities my way.
Cool. And can you tell me about some of the podcasts that you've been on? Like what are your sort of personal highlights, I guess?
So one of my tips, I'm going to throw in a tip also, is that whenever someone reaches out to you to book yourself on a podcast that they're hosting, always research the host. So maybe like a year or 2 years ago, time frame after the pandemic or during the pandemic has thrown me. So I don't know what year anything is anymore.
I don't think any of us do.
Exactly, like day, I have no idea. And anyway, so this gentleman reached out to me and said, I'd love for you to be on my podcast. And so I just looked really quick and I saw that it was, well rated and I looked at the branding and didn't really do any due diligence at all. So I hopped on and he kept name dropping someone who I find to be amazing, right? It was Louise Hayes, and like just amazing woman author, just iconic in the spiritual world. And he keeps like name dropping her during this podcast, and not in a ooh, look at me, but like literally like just, it's like he's just talking about his son or, just, as I'm on this podcast, I Google him because I'm like, who am I talking to? I have no idea. So the guy turned out to be like a CEO or CFO of Hay House, which is one of these big publishing houses that I have always dreamed of being on as an author or speaker. And I'm like, thinking to myself, I am on this podcast. This man is hosting it. I have no idea who this is. And that's when I was like, you know what, Violet, it probably would have been good for you to do like a little research, just find out who it is, because you would have been more prepared. And so that was a really big lesson and funny moment at the same time.
I think that's a really good tip, though. And I think as a guest also, I suppose it allows you to, kind of tailor your message for that episode or for that show. And make sure that you're talking about stuff that's relevant to that audience versus just kind of like treating every interview as the same, because I think every interview is not the same. It shouldn't be treated like that.
Absolutely. And it's your stage, right? So that person's giving the opportunity, and it's not to be salesy and pitchy and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so great, you should hire me, or you should, it's really just, it's a platform for you to share your knowledge, your wisdom, how you serve the world. And if you're not prepared and you don't understand who you're talking to, like I would do that in any meeting. I don't understand. Like if someone was like, I want to book a meeting with you, I would spend, but for whatever reason at the time, I was naive and I just didn't take the time to research, but I surely would have been, it turned out to be a great podcast, but I could have done so much better. And I definitely, it was time consuming and not wise to be Googling the person that's hosting the podcast.
Okay, that's great advice. Thanks for that. And how many podcasts would you say you've been on over the past year then?
Oh, I think I'm on 2 or 3 a week.
Wow.
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I do a lot.
Right. So here's a good question for you. So 2 or 3 a week, how do you manage to schedule them amongst your diary? I imagine you're a very busy person anyway. What's some tips for making sure that you're organized and you're kind of constantly filling your pipeline with interviews?
So I found a pattern. I think a lot of times, podcast hosts are doing it as a side hustle. And so they generally are doing them more in the evening, or they have a routine where they're doing it like during the lunchtime breaks. And so I generally try to keep those time blocks a little bit more flexible. Mm-hmm. And often people that are seasoned podcast hosts, they have already a schedule in place. So they record every Wednesday, as an example, at 2 p.m. or every Thursday at 8 p.m. And so really just having the ability to be flexible when you do get that invitation or that request to say, you know what, it is a great match. We'd love to have you as a guest, to be flexible enough and recognize that this is a great opportunity for you to meet hundreds and hundreds of people that will be listening following along and perhaps reach out to you and have a great opportunity for you to expand your own brand.
And what difference would you say it's made to your brand, Fem City, as a whole? Like being on other people's podcasts, being on shows, has it helped you market the business and kind of get the word out there?
Absolutely. I find that every time I'm on a podcast, there's generally something that happens after, whether I'm asked to be on another podcast or someone will reach out and say, hey, and it could be months, by the way, down the line. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I did this podcast and then like 5 minutes later, this great opportunity that was like $50,000. Like, it can be months from then. I'm still getting, I know our analytics, I still sometimes can see traffic coming through certain podcasts that I've been on. And so it continuously lives beyond that 1 hour that you were on or those 30 minutes.
Yes.
But it always leads. If you do a really good job and you show up and you share wisdom, that's relevant to that audience, it will always come back in some benefit to you.
That's really important. I think, you mentioned that podcasts are evergreen. Like sometimes I don't know about you, I find I'll do an interview and like some podcasters are really organized. They're working like 6-8 months ahead of time. So you record an interview and it won't sometimes go live for 8 months. And then by that stage, you've almost kind of forgotten about it. And then you'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that. And it'll suddenly go live. So I think that there's another added benefit to making sure that you're kind of being consistent with your recordings as a guest is making sure that, if you commit to doing 1 a week or, 5 a month or whatever it might be, you're always going to have new episodes coming out, because of that kind of that offset, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's another great tip is that when you are on a podcast, generally you get the link or an image or even your Google alert will tell you this podcast went live. And what's really great is if you could share that marketing with your followers, even if you only had 20 or 200, sharing it and tagging that podcast, what it does is it shows off, first of all, that you value that time and others are watching. And others that have podcasts will say, you know what, I want to have a guest on my show who's going to share relevant information, but also promote it with their followers as well. Because it's at the end of the day, it's a win-win for everyone. And so the more that you can share the podcast that you were on, the better it makes you look for those that are looking to have really amazing guests that obviously will help that podcast grow as well. So that's something that I always tell people to do because if you don't, it's, the chances of you getting seen, and it also highlights the authority figure that you are. As you're on podcasts, it highlights that you're an expert in that field and others find you of use and of value. So
absolutely,
that's another extra tip.
and just one last question. What advice would you give in terms of like actually your outreach and writing a pitch? Like what's your approach to that been?
Sure. So I actually created a personal website as well for myself because I had to document all of my pitches. And so what's really great, then I can draft it and I can add it to matchmaker.fm. But what I found is I listen to what people want to hear from me during the day.
Okay.
So as an example of someone like during the beginning of the pandemic, a couple of the questions that I was getting from our community were questions geared towards how do you go online? How do you go ahead and go into an e-commerce? How do you pivot, a product that you were like, if you were a massage therapist or a makeup artist, how do you pivot into that virtual space? So then I knew that would be a really great podcast pitch because then other people would be talking about it too. So kind of listening to see like what's going on, what the trends are, just like you would with writing, right? I write for Entrepreneur Magazine as well. So sometimes I'll like listen to see, what are people talking about? Okay, if that's going to be the conversation, it's probably going to increase. Let me start talking about it to be of value to others and editing it along the way. So making sure that it doesn't have cobwebs on it, that you're always freshening up your topics so that it's trending.
Do you know what, Violet? That's absolutely fantastic advice. I love that. And I think, like you say, that's really good. Like not making sure that what you're talking about doesn't have cobwebs on it because there's always new stuff going on. There's always new things to be talking about. And I think as well as a guest, like if you're talking about the same stuff over and over and over again, it kind of becomes boring or you can end up sounding a little bit robotic. So making sure that you've kind of got this kind of like fresh new ideas of things that you can be talking about, things that you can be pitching, makes it more interesting for you as a guest as well as the host, I guess.
Absolutely. And even like for myself, as an example, at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the best podcast pitches I had was how to be intentional with networking. Well, that's irrelevant if we're in a quarantine and we're not being able to leave our house.
Right.
So even editing that and saying, just adding intentional networking in a virtual space. So you can tweak the things that you have, but adding those little, the distinction so that it makes it relevant to today's conversation makes a huge difference.
Violet, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time today. If people want to find out more about you and FemCity, how can they get in touch? How can they find out? Well,
I'm on matchmaker.fm.
Awesome.
And you can also find us at femcity.com.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
There is an easier way to get booked onto more podcasts as a guest. Join matchmaker.fm for free today and start making connections with podcasters who are looking for guests just like you.